The scorching San Diego sun beat down mercilessly on Naval Amphibious Base Coronado as hundreds of families gathered for what should have been one of the proudest moments in military history. Today was Navy SEAL Graduation Day, a ceremony that marked the end of the most grueling military training program in the world. Among the sea of dress whites and proud family members, one woman stood quietly in the back, her weathered hands clutching a simple folded flag. She wore no fancy dress, carried no elaborate signs of support, and asked for no special recognition. But beneath the sleeve of her modest blouse lay a secret that would soon stop the entire ceremony cold. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah Chen had driven 18 hours straight from a small farming town in Nebraska, her ancient pickup truck loaded with nothing but determination and a heart full of pride for her son Marcus. She'd worked 3 jobs for the past 2 years just to keep food on the table after her husband died in a factory accident, never once complaining, never once asking for help. The military had been Marcus's way out, his chance to build something meaningful from the ashes of their family's tragedy. As she found a spot among the other families, Sarah couldn't help but feel out of place. The other mothers wore designer dresses and carried professional cameras with telephoto lenses. Their husbands stood tall in pressed suits, some sporting military service pins from their own distinguished careers. Sarah smoothed down her simple cotton blouse, the nicest thing she owned, and reminded herself that she belonged here just as much as anyone else. Her son had earned his place among the elite, and she had every right to witness his triumph. The Navy SEAL graduation ceremony began with the precision and pageantry that the military was famous for. Commander James Mitchell, a decorated veteran with over 20 years of service, took his position at the podium. His chest bore the weight of numerous medals and ribbons, each one telling a story of valor, sacrifice, and unwavering dedication to his country. His voice carried across the assembly with the authority of a man who had seen combat in 3 different theaters of war. "Ladies and gentlemen, families and friends," Commander Mitchell began, his voice echoing through the PA system, "today we gather to honor some of the finest warriors our nation has ever produced. These men have endured what most would consider impossible. They have pushed beyond every physical and mental barrier, proving themselves worthy of wearing the trident, the symbol of naval special warfare." Sarah's eyes searched the rows of newly minted SEALs until she spotted Marcus. Even at a distance, she could see how the training had transformed her boy into a man. His shoulders were broader, his stance more confident, his eyes sharper. The scared 18-year-old who had left home 2 years ago had been forged into something extraordinary. A tear rolled down her cheek as she remembered all the nights she'd worried, all the letters that arrived with more words blacked out than visible, all the phone calls that never came when they were supposed to. The ceremony continued with speeches about honor, courage, and commitment. Each word seemed to carry extra weight in the California air, as if the very atmosphere understood the significance of what these young warriors had accomplished. The statistics were staggering. Of the original class that had started SEAL training, less than 20% had made it through. The rest had either quit during Hell Week, been rolled back due to injury, or simply couldn't meet the impossibly high standards required to join the most elite fighting force in the world. Commander Mitchell called each graduate forward individually, reading their names with the respect and dignity they deserved. As each young SEAL received their trident pin, families erupted in cheers and applause. Professional photographers captured every moment, and proud parents wiped away tears of joy. Sarah watched it all with a mixture of excitement and nervousness, knowing that Marcus's moment was approaching. But as the ceremony progressed, something unexpected began to happen. Commander Mitchell's attention kept drifting to the crowd, his experienced eyes scanning the faces of the family members. There was something bothering him, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. His instincts, honed by decades of military service and combat experience, were telling him that someone in that crowd didn't belong, or rather, that someone belonged more than they realized. It started as just a feeling, the kind of inexplicable awareness that had kept him alive through multiple deployments in hostile territory. His gaze continued to sweep across the assembled families, looking through whatever had triggered his internal alarm system. He had learned long ago to trust these instincts, even when he couldn't immediately explain them. The sun continued its relentless assault on the ceremony, causing some of the older attendees to fan themselves with their programs. Sarah shifted uncomfortably in the heat, unconsciously rolling up her sleeves just slightly to catch whatever breeze might offer relief. It was an innocent gesture, one that thousands of people make every day without thinking. But in that moment, as the fabric of her blouse shifted just a few inches up her arm, she unknowingly revealed something that would soon stop the entire ceremony cold. Commander Mitchell's trained eyes caught the movement, and for just an instant, he glimpsed something that made his blood run cold. It was barely visible, partially hidden beneath her sleeve, but unmistakable to someone with his background and clearance level. His hand involuntarily moved to his chest, a reflexive gesture he developed whenever confronted with classified material or sensitive intelligence. The sight hit him like a physical blow, causing him to pause mid-sentence in his prepared remarks. The families in attendance shifted restlessly, wondering why their distinguished speaker had suddenly gone silent. But Commander Mitchell's mind was racing, trying to process what he had just seen and what it could possibly mean.
The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity, though in reality it lasted only a few seconds. Commander Mitchell's extensive training in intelligence gathering and threat assessment kicked into overdrive as he tried to make sense of what he'd glimpsed. The partial image burned in his memory, a symbol that he'd seen only in classified briefings, in secure facilities with the highest levels of clearance. It was impossible. It couldn't be real. And yet, there it was, permanently etched into the skin of a woman who looked like she could barely afford the gas money to attend her son's graduation. Sarah noticed the commander's strange pause and felt a flutter of anxiety in her stomach. Had she done something wrong? Was she not supposed to be there? The self-doubt that had plagued her throughout the ceremony began to intensify. She glanced around at the other families, wondering if somehow she'd violated some unspoken protocol or dress code. The last thing she wanted was to embarrass Marcus on his big day. Marcus himself had noticed the unusual pause as well. From his position in the formation, he could see his mother in the crowd, and he could tell something was wrong. The commander's sudden silence was drawing attention, and Marcus felt a protective surge toward his mother. She'd sacrificed everything for this moment, and he wouldn't let anything ruin it for her. Commander Mitchell forced himself to continue with the ceremony, but his mind was no longer on the prepared script. Instead, he was mentally reviewing everything he knew about classified operations, about the symbols and markings that designated the highest levels of military intelligence work. The tattoo he'd glimpsed, if that's what it was, belonged to a program so secret that even his substantial clearance level only gave him peripheral knowledge of its existence. The program was known simply as Nightshade, and it had been operational during some of the most critical conflicts of the past 3 decades. The operatives who bore that mark weren't listed in any official records. They didn't exist in any database. They were ghosts, shadows who carried out missions that officially never happened. And according to everything Commander Mitchell knew, they were all men. There had never been a female operative in the Nightshade program. It was physically impossible, given the nature of the missions and the military's policies regarding women in combat roles during the program's operational period. Yet here was this unassuming woman from Nebraska, wearing a discount store blouse and carrying herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had worked with her hands her entire life. Nothing about her suggested military training or intelligence background. She looked exactly like what she appeared to be, a hardworking mother who had scraped together everything she had to support her son's dreams. As the ceremony continued and more names were called, Commander Mitchell found himself studying Sarah with increasing intensity. He watched how she carried herself, looking for any sign of the training that would have been necessary for someone in her apparent position. But all he saw was a tired woman who had clearly lived a hard life, someone who probably never been further from home than this California naval base. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. Everything his experience told him suggested that this woman couldn't possibly be connected to one of the military's most classified programs. And yet, the evidence of his own eyes was undeniable. He'd seen that symbol enough times in classified briefings to recognize it instantly, even partially obscured and at a distance. Sarah began to notice the commander's continued attention, and her anxiety grew stronger. She pulled her sleeves down self-consciously, inadvertently covering the very thing that had captured his interest. The movement only served to increase Commander Mitchell's certainty about what he'd seen. Someone who was completely innocent wouldn't think to cover their arms in response to scrutiny. The internal conflict was tearing at the commander's concentration. On one hand, his duty was to complete the ceremony with the dignity and respect these new SEALs deserved. On the other hand, if his suspicions were correct, he was looking at someone whose very presence represented a security situation of the highest magnitude. The protocols for this type of situation weren't covered in any manual he'd studied. Marcus Chen's name was finally called, and Sarah's heart swelled with pride as she watched her son step forward to receive his trident pin. All of her worries and anxieties melted away as she watched the culmination of years of sacrifice and dedication. This was the moment she dreamed of through all those double shifts at the diner, all those nights when she'd fallen asleep at the kitchen table paying bills by lamplight. But as Marcus approached the podium, Commander Mitchell faced a moment of truth. Protocol demanded that he complete the ceremony first and deal with any security concerns afterward. But every instinct he'd developed as an intelligence officer was screaming that this situation required immediate attention. The presence of someone with apparent nightshade credentials at a public military ceremony was unprecedented and potentially dangerous. The decision was made for him when Sarah, overcome with emotion at seeing her son receive his pin, unconsciously raised her hand to wipe away tears. The movement caused her sleeve to ride up again, and this time, Commander Mitchell got a much clearer view of what lay beneath. What he saw made his hands shake slightly as he pinned the trident to Marcus's uniform. It wasn't just the nightshade symbol. Surrounding it were other markings that told a story he could barely comprehend. Service dates that span some of the most dangerous conflicts of the past 30 years. Mission indicators that suggested involvement in operations he'd only heard about in the most secure facilities. And most shocking of all, a small symbol that indicated the highest possible security clearance, a level that theoretically didn't even exist for someone of her apparent background. Marcus noticed his commander's trembling hands and the strange intensity in his eyes. "Is everything all right, sir?" he asked quietly, genuinely concerned for the man who had just honored him with the symbol of his new brotherhood. Commander Mitchell looked into the young SEAL's eyes and saw the same quiet strength he'd noticed in his mother. For the first time, he began to see the family resemblance that went deeper than mere genetics. There was something in Marcus's bearing, in the way he carried himself, that suggested he'd inherited more than just his mother's determination.
"Congratulations, SEAL Chen," Commander Mitchell managed to say, his voice carrying the weight of newfound respect and growing confusion. "Your mother, she must be very proud." The words came out carefully, each one chosen with the precision of someone walking through a minefield. He handed Marcus his certificate with hands that had steadied, but his eyes never left Sarah's position in the crowd. Marcus beamed with pride, completely unaware of the undercurrent of tension that had developed. "Yes, sir, she is. She's sacrificed everything for this moment. I couldn't have done it without her." His words carried the deep love and respect of a son who truly understood what his mother had given up to get him here. As Marcus returned to his position in the formation, Commander Mitchell continued with the remaining graduates, but his autopilot training was doing most of the work now. His conscious mind was rapidly cycling through everything he knew about nightshade operations, trying to piece together a puzzle that seemed to defy logic. The program had been active primarily during the late 1980s through the early 2000s, focusing on deep cover intelligence gathering in hostile territory. The missions were so classified that even their existence was compartmentalized beyond most clearance levels. What made the situation even more perplexing was the timeline. If Sarah Chen had been involved in nightshade operations during their peak activity period, she would have been barely out of her teens, if she'd even been old enough to serve at all. The woman he was looking at appeared to be in her early 50s, which would have made her the right age for service during that era, but everything about her background suggested a completely different life path. The ceremony was winding down, with only a few more graduates to be honored. Sarah continued to watch with tears of joy streaming down her face, completely oblivious to the storm of questions she'd inadvertently triggered. To her, this was simply the culmination of years of hardship and sacrifice, the moment when all of her struggles would finally be worth it. She thought about her late husband, wishing he could be there to see her son receive such an incredible honor. Commander Mitchell finished with the last graduate and moved to the closing remarks portion of the ceremony. Standard protocol called for a brief speech about the responsibilities of wearing the trident, followed by dismissal, and the traditional family reunion time. But as he looked out at the assembled crowd, his eyes kept returning to Sarah Chen, and he knew that this ceremony was going to end very differently than planned. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying across the assembled crowd. "Today, we have witnessed the birth of 23 new Navy SEALs. These warriors will go on to serve our nation in ways that may never be publicly recognized, in places that may never appear on any official record. They have joined a brotherhood that exists in the shadows, protecting freedoms that others will never even know were threatened." The words took on new meaning as he spoke them, his eyes locked on Sarah. If his suspicions were correct, she had already walked that path, already lived the life of sacrifice and anonymity that her son was just beginning. The irony was overwhelming, a son following in his mother's footsteps down a road she could never tell him she'd already traveled. As the formal portion of the ceremony concluded and families began moving toward their graduating SEALs, Commander Mitchell made a decision that would change everything. Instead of following standard protocol and retreating to the administrative offices, he began walking directly toward Sarah Chen. His stride was purposeful but not threatening, the measured pace of someone who was used to handling delicate situations. Sarah noticed his approach and felt a fresh wave of anxiety. Had she somehow violated protocol by being there? Was there some issue with Marcus's graduation? She began mentally reviewing everything she'd done since arriving, wondering what could have possibly gone wrong. "Mrs. Chen," Commander Mitchell said as he approached, his voice carrying a tone she couldn't quite identify. "I wonder if I might have a word with you privately." The request sent a chill down Sarah's spine. Her face went pale, and for the first time since the conversation began, her carefully maintained composure cracked slightly. She instinctively pulled her sleeve down further, covering the very thing he was asking to see. "I don't understand what you're talking about," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. The words sounded hollow even to her own ears.
Commander Mitchell's expression softened slightly, recognizing the fear in her eyes. This wasn't the reaction of someone trying to hide something malicious. This was the response of someone whose deepest secret had just been threatened with exposure. His years of experience in intelligence work had taught him to read people. And what he saw in Sarah Chen's face was pure terror mixed with resignation. "Mrs. Chen," he said gently, "I need you to understand that I'm not here to cause you trouble. But what I believe I saw on your arm during the ceremony, it's raised some very serious questions that need to be answered. Questions that involve national security at the highest levels." Sarah's world was crashing down around her. For 25 years, she'd lived with this secret, never speaking of it to anyone, not even her husband. The tattoo on her arm represented a life she'd left behind, a person she'd sworn never to acknowledge again. The farm wife, the factory worker's widow, the struggling single mother. That was who she'd become. The other person, the one who carried out missions that officially never happened, was supposed to be dead and buried. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the distant sounds of celebration. "That person doesn't exist anymore. She never existed. I have a life now, a son who needs me. I won't go back to that world." Commander Mitchell felt a chill run down his spine. Her words were confirmation of his worst fears and his greatest suspicions. This unassuming farm woman from Nebraska was indeed someone from the shadows, someone who had lived the kind of life that most people couldn't even imagine. But her obvious terror suggested that her past involvement hadn't ended voluntarily. "I need to see the tattoo, Mrs. Chen. Not because I want to destroy your life, but because I need to understand what we're dealing with here. If you are who I think you are, then your presence here isn't just a coincidence. Someone with your background doesn't just show up at a Navy SEAL graduation by accident." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Sarah looked toward the celebration, where Marcus was laughing with his fellow SEALs, completely unaware that his mother's past was about to catch up with her. The sight of his joy only made her decision more painful. With trembling hands, she slowly rolled up her left sleeve, revealing the intricate tattoo that had remained hidden beneath fabric and shame for so many years. Commander Mitchell's breath caught in his throat as the full image was revealed. It was even more elaborate than he had glimpsed during the ceremony. The nightshade symbol was there, but it was surrounded by other markings that told a story of service so classified that he wasn't even sure he had the clearance to be seeing it. Mission dates, operation codes, and symbols that indicated involvement in some of the most dangerous intelligence work ever conducted by the United States military. But what shocked him most were the service dates. Sarah Chen had been active during operations that were legendary in the intelligence community. Missions that had prevented terrorist attacks, stopped weapons proliferation, and gathered intelligence that had saved countless American lives. And according to the markings on her arm, she hadn't been a support operative or analyst. She'd been a field agent working in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. "Dear God, you're Ghost 7! The codename hit Sarah like a physical blow. She hadn't heard those words spoken aloud in over a decade. Ghost 7 was supposed to have died in a training accident in 1998, officially buried with full military honors in Arlington National Cemetery. The woman who bore that designation was supposed to have ceased to exist the moment the mission parameters changed and female operatives were no longer viable for the assignments. That person doesn't exist anymore. She never existed. I have a life now, a son who needs me. I won't go back to that world." Commander Mitchell felt a chill run down his spine. Her words were confirmation of his worst fears and his greatest suspicions. This unassuming farm woman from Nebraska was indeed someone from the shadows, someone who had lived the kind of life that most people couldn't even imagine. But her obvious terror suggested that her past involvement hadn't ended voluntarily. "I need to see the tattoo, Mrs. Chen. Not because I want to destroy your life, but because I need to understand what we're dealing with here. If you are who I think you are, then your presence here isn't just a coincidence. Someone with your background doesn't just show up at a Navy SEAL graduation by accident." "What happens now?" she asked, her voice hollow with the resignation of someone who knew that her carefully constructed life was about to crumble. "Do I disappear again? Do you arrest me? Do you just pretend you never saw this?" Commander Mitchell was quiet for a long moment, weighing his options and their implications. Technically, he should be following strict protocols for this type of security situation. There were procedures in place for dealing with former classified operatives, and none of them involved pleasant conversations in the California sunshine. But as he looked at this woman, this mother who had sacrificed everything for her son's success, he found himself questioning everything he'd been taught about duty and protocol. The weight of decision pressed heavily on Commander Mitchell's shoulders as he studied Sarah's face. Here was a woman who had served her country with distinction in ways that could never be publicly acknowledged, who had given up her very identity for the sake of national security, and who had spent the last quarter-century living the quiet life of a Midwest farm wife. The tears in her eyes weren't from fear of punishment. They were from the terror of losing the life she'd built and the son who meant everything to her. Mrs. Chen, Sarah, he said softly, using her name with a respect that acknowledged both her past and present identities. I need you to understand something. What you did as Ghost 7, those missions, that service, it saved American lives, probably thousands of them. The intelligence you gathered, the operations you completed, they prevented attacks that would have changed the course of history. Sarah wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, smearing the simple makeup she'd applied so carefully that morning. That doesn't matter anymore. That person made her choices, and Sarah Chen has made different ones. I chose to be a mother, to be normal, to be forgotten. I kept my word for 25 years. I never broke cover, never made contact, never did anything to compromise operational security. But you also never stopped serving, Commander Mitchell observed, his tactical mind beginning to see patterns that Sarah herself might not have recognized. Look at your son. Look at the man you raised. Do you think it's a coincidence that a boy from rural Nebraska with no family military tradition decided to become a Navy SEAL? Do you think his dedication, his mental toughness, his ability to push through the impossible just materialized out of thin air? Sarah's eyes widened as she considered his words. She'd never thought about it that way, but the parallels were undeniable. Marcus had always possessed an inner strength that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than genetics. His determination in the face of adversity, his ability to compartmentalize and focus under pressure, his natural leadership abilities. These weren't traits that typically emerged from a small farming community. You trained him without even realizing it, the commander continued. Every lesson about perseverance, every example of quiet strength, every demonstration of putting duty above personal comfort, you were passing on the skills that made Ghost 7 legendary. You just did it as his mother instead of as his commanding officer. The realization hit Sarah like a revelation. She thought about all the times she'd pushed Marcus to finish what he started, no matter how difficult. The way she'd taught him to analyze problems systematically, breaking them down into manageable components. The emphasis she'd placed on physical fitness, mental discipline, and moral courage. She thought she was just trying to raise a good son, but perhaps she had been unconsciously preparing him for something greater. The question now, Commander Mitchell said, is what we do with this information. Technically, I should be reporting this up the chain of command immediately. There are protocols for situations involving former classified operatives, and most of them assume hostile intent or security breaches. But you don't think I'm a security threat, Sarah said, reading the uncertainty in his expression. No, I don't. If you were going to cause problems, you would have done so years ago. If you were working for a foreign power, you wouldn't have maintained such a perfect cover for so long. If you were planning something against American interests, you wouldn't have raised a son to serve his country with such distinction. He paused, looking toward the celebration where Marcus was still surrounded by his classmates. But the decision about what happens next isn't entirely mine to make. Sarah felt a fresh wave of panic. You can't involve Marcus in this. Whatever happens to me, he can't know. He's worked too hard, sacrificed too much to have his career destroyed by my past. Promise me that, Commander. Whatever else you do, promise me you won't destroy my son's future. The protective fire in her voice reminded Commander Mitchell why Ghost 7 had been so effective in the field. There was a steel core beneath the farm wife exterior, a strength that had been tempered by years of impossible missions and life-or-death decisions. This was a woman who would do anything to protect what mattered most to her, and right now, that was her son's future. Sarah, he said, making another decision that went against standard protocol, I'm going to make you an offer, but I need you to listen carefully and think about what I'm proposing before you answer. Sarah nodded, though her body language suggested she was preparing for bad news. The intelligence community has changed a lot since your time. The threats we face now are different, more complex, more nuanced than the ones you dealt with during your active years.
We need people with your skill set, your experience, your particular combination of abilities. But we also need people who understand sacrifice, who know the cost of service, and who have something real to fight for. You're offering me a job? Sarah said, the disbelief evident in her voice. I'm offering you a chance to serve again, but on your own terms this time. Consulting work, threat assessment, training new operatives, the kind of work that would let you stay Sarah Chen while occasionally drawing on the expertise of Ghost 7. It would provide legitimate cover for your presence in military circles, explain any unusual knowledge or skills you might display, and give you a reason to be involved in your son's world without raising suspicions. Sarah stared at him, trying to process the magnitude of what he was suggesting. After 25 years of hiding, of denying the most significant part of her identity, he was offering her a chance to reclaim it, partially, carefully, but genuinely. What's the catch? She asked, because her experience had taught her that offers this good always came with hidden costs.
Commander Mitchell appreciated her wariness. It confirmed his assessment that Ghost 7's operational instincts were still intact despite decades of dormancy. The catch is that you'd be walking back into a world you left for good reasons. The stress, the secrecy, the constant awareness of threats that civilian populations never see, all of that would become part of your life again. And there's no guarantee that your involvement could remain as limited as we'd initially plan. Sarah considered his words carefully. She'd spent 25 years building walls between herself and the world of intelligence operations, creating a life where the most dangerous thing she faced was a broken tractor or a late payment on the farm mortgage. The idea of deliberately tearing down those walls was terrifying, but it was also strangely appealing. She'd never admitted it to herself, but there had been moments over the years when she'd felt like she was living in black and white after spending years in vivid color. "And if I refuse?" she asked. "If I choose to maintain my cover and go back to Nebraska?" Then, officially, this conversation never happened. I returned to my duties, you return to your life, and we both hope that no one else ever makes the connection I made today. Commander Mitchell's expression grew more serious. But unofficially, Sarah, the world is becoming more dangerous, not less. The skills you possess, the experience you carry, there may come a time when your country needs Ghost 7 again, whether you're ready or not. The weight of prophecy in his words sent the chill down Sarah's spine. She'd seen enough in her operational years to know that threats had a way of finding people, regardless of how well they hid. The peaceful farm life in Nebraska felt suddenly fragile, like a bubble that could be popped by forces beyond her control. "I need time to think," she said finally. This changes everything. I have a life, responsibilities, people who depend on me. I can't just uproot everything based on a conversation at my son's graduation ceremony. Of course, take all the time you need. But while you're deciding, I want you to consider something else. Commander Mitchell gestured towards the celebration, where Marcus was now posing for pictures with his fellow graduates. Your son is about to enter a world where the enemies are more sophisticated, more determined, and more dangerous than anything previous generations of SEALs have faced. The traditional approaches to training and preparation may not be sufficient for what he's going to encounter. Sarah followed his gaze and felt her heart clench with a familiar fear. She'd lived with the knowledge that every mission could be her last, that every operation carried the possibility of never coming home. The thought of Marcus facing those same dangers, possibly without the benefit of the hard-won wisdom she'd accumulated, was almost unbearable. "You're suggesting that I could help prepare him," she said, understanding the subtext of his words, "that my experience could give him an advantage? I'm suggesting that the best way to protect him might be to stop hiding from who you really are. The skills you've kept dormant, the knowledge you've suppressed, those could be the difference between life and death for him and his teammates, but only if you're willing to acknowledge them again." The moral complexity of the situation was overwhelming.
For 25 years, Sarah had believed that the best way to protect Marcus was to shield him from her past, to give him a normal life, free from the shadows she had inhabited. But now she was being told that the opposite might be true, that her past could be the key to his future survival. As they spoke, Marcus had begun looking around the celebration, obviously searching for his mother. She could see the concern in his expression as he realized she wasn't where he'd left her. Her son's protective instincts were as strong as her own, and she knew he'd come looking for her if she didn't return to the celebration soon. "I should get back," she said, pulling her sleeve down to cover the tattoo that had started this entire conversation. "Marcus will be worried, and this is his day. Whatever we decided about the future, I won't let it overshadow his achievement." Commander Mitchell nodded with approval. That's exactly what I'd expect from Ghost 7, putting the mission first, even when the mission is being a mother. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, but instead of handing it to her, he slipped it into her purse. "My direct number is on there. When you're ready to talk, call me. Day or night, secure or unsecured, I'll answer." As they walked back towards the celebration, Sarah felt like she was floating between two worlds. On one side was the life she built, safe and predictable and built on foundations of deliberate obscurity. On the other was a return to purpose, to using skills that had defined her for so many years, to serving something larger than herself once again. "Sarah," Commander Mitchell said quietly as they approached the edge of the crowd, "whatever you decide, know this. Your country is grateful for your service, both past and present. Raising a son like Marcus, that's service too, even if it doesn't come with medals or recognition." The words hit her harder than she expected. For 25 years, she'd felt like she'd abandoned her duty, walked away from her responsibility to serve. To hear someone acknowledge that motherhood had been its own form of service, its own kind of mission, brought tears to her eyes again. Marcus spotted her approaching and broke away from his group, his face lighting up with relief and joy. "Mom, there you are. I was starting to worry. Come on, you have to meet my teammates." As she was pulled into the celebration, she felt the weight of Commander Mitchell's offer pressing against her consciousness. The contrast between the joy of the moment and the gravity of her situation was almost overwhelming. Here was her son, achieving the pinnacle of military training, surrounded by young warriors who were about to face dangers they couldn't fully comprehend. And here was she, possessing knowledge and experience that could potentially save their lives, but only if she was willing to risk everything she'd built over the past 25 years. The celebration continued around them, families taking photos and sharing stories of the journey that had brought them to this moment. Sarah participated with genuine enthusiasm, but part of her mind was already running threat assessments and tactical evaluations. She watched the interactions between the new SEALs and their families, noting the security vulnerabilities, the patterns of behavior that could be exploited by hostile forces, the operational details that were being shared too freely in public spaces. It was like seeing the world through two different sets of eyes simultaneously. Sarah Chen saw proud families celebrating their son's achievements. Ghost 7 saw potential intelligence targets and security risks that could be exploited by sophisticated adversaries. The dichotomy was exhausting, but it was also illuminating. For the first time in decades, she was remembering what it felt like to be operationally aware, to see the world as it really was, rather than as she trained herself to perceive it. As the afternoon began to wind down and families started making their goodbyes, Sarah knew that she was running out of time to make her decision. Commander Mitchell had been patient, maintaining his distance while she processed everything he'd told her, but she could see him preparing to approach for a final conversation. Whatever choice she made in the next few minutes would determine the trajectory of the rest of her life. Marcus noticed she was distracted and gently touched her arm. "Mom, are you sure you're okay? You've seemed different since you talked to Commander Mitchell. Did something happen that I should know about?" The direct question from her son forced her to confront the immediate reality of her situation. If she chose to return to the intelligence community, Marcus would eventually need to know the truth about her background. If she chose to maintain her cover and go back to Nebraska, she would have to live with the knowledge that she'd passed up an opportunity to potentially save lives, including possibly his own. "Marcus," she said carefully, "there are things about my past that I've never told you, things that I thought were buried and would never be relevant to our lives. But being here today, seeing what you've accomplished and what you're preparing to face, I'm starting to think that maybe the past doesn't stay buried as easily as we hope it will be." Her son's expression grew more serious, his SEAL training automatically engaging as he recognized the weight behind her words. "Mom, whatever it is, you can tell me. I'm not a kid anymore, and I've been cleared for classified information. If there's something in your background that's relevant to my career or my safety, I need to know about it." Sarah felt a surge of pride at his maturity and professionalism, even as she struggled with the magnitude of what she was considering revealing. "It's not that simple, Marcus. Some secrets aren't just personal. They're matters of national security. Some truth can't be spoken without consequences that extend far beyond our family." Commander Mitchell appeared beside them, as if summoned by the gravity of their conversation. "Mrs. Chen, Marcus, I don't mean to interrupt, but we do need to reach some resolution about our earlier discussion. There are protocols that need to be followed regardless of which direction we decide to go." Sarah looked between the two most important men in her life. Her son, who represented everything she had built and everything she hoped to protect, and the commander, who represented a chance to reclaim the purpose and identity she'd sacrificed decades ago. The choice between them felt impossible, but she was beginning to realize that maybe she didn't have to choose. Maybe there was a way to honor both parts of herself. "Commander," she said, her voice carrying a new note of authority that surprised both men, "if I were to consider your offer, what guarantees could you provide about my son's safety and career? Because if I'm going to step back into that world,
I need to know that doing so won't put him at risk."
Mom, there you are. I was starting to worry. Come on, you have to meet my teammates. Marcus's enthusiasm was infectious, and Sarah felt herself being pulled back into the joy of the moment. But as she followed her son toward the group of newly minted SEALs, she was acutely aware of Commander Mitchell's presence behind her and the weight of the decision she now carried. The other graduates welcomed her warmly, the respect for Marcus extending naturally to his mother. They'd all heard stories during training about the sacrifices their families had made, and there was an unspoken understanding that the women and men who had supported them through the grueling process deserved recognition too. "Mrs. Chen," said a tall young man with a slight southern accent, "Marcus told us how you worked 3 jobs to support him through college. That's incredible dedication." Sarah smiled, accepting the praise while internally marveling at how her son had managed to tell his story without revealing any of the details that might have raised questions. He'd instinctively understood the importance of maintaining operational security around their family history, even though he had no idea why such caution was necessary. "Every mother does what she has to do for her children," Sarah replied, the standard deflection she'd perfected over years of avoiding attention. But as she spoke, she noticed Commander Mitchell observing the interaction from a respectful distance, and she wondered if he was seeing additional confirmation of his theories about her background. As the celebration continued, Sarah found herself studying her son's teammates with new eyes. These young men represented the next generation of America's elite warriors, and they were about to face threats that she understood better than they could possibly imagine. The knowledge was both empowering and terrifying. Empowering because she might actually be able to help them, terrifying because she knew what they were walking into. One of the SEALs, a quiet young man named Rodriguez, mentioned that he'd grown up in a border town and had seen firsthand the kind of sophisticated criminal organizations that were increasingly blending terrorism with traditional crime. His comments revealed an understanding of threat patterns that impressed Sarah, but also highlighted gaps in official training that her operational experience could potentially address. Another graduate, Thompson, talked about his concerns regarding cyber warfare and how traditional SEAL training might need to evolve to address digital threats that could compromise missions before they even began.
His insights were sophisticated for someone so young, but Sarah could see areas where her experience with intelligence gathering and threat assessment could provide valuable context. Marcus himself demonstrated leadership qualities that went beyond what standard military training could instill. He naturally drew his teammates together, diffused minor tensions with humor, and showed an intuitive understanding of group dynamics that reminded Sarah uncomfortably of her own tactical abilities. The realization that he'd inherited more than just her determination was both proud and troubling. As the afternoon wore on, families began departing for private celebrations and reunions. Sarah knew she should be heading back to Nebraska. She had animals to tend and bills to pay, but the weight of Commander Mitchell's offer was making it difficult to focus on mundane responsibilities. How could she go back to worrying about crop prices and equipment repairs when she had just been offered a chance to serve her country again? Marcus noticed her distraction and pulled her aside for a private moment. "Mom, are you okay? You seem different since you talked to Commander Mitchell. Did he say something that upset you?" The direct question forced Sarah to confront the immediate challenge of maintaining her cover while processing life-changing information. Her son's perceptiveness was another reminder of the qualities he'd inherited, and it made lying to him even more difficult than usual. "He just wanted to thank me for raising such a fine young man," she said, which was technically true if it wasn't complete. Sometimes it's overwhelming to realize that all the sacrifice was worth it. Marcus wrapped his arms around her in a hug that felt like it might be strong enough to anchor her to the life they'd built together. "Every day, I'm grateful for everything you've done for me, Mom. I know it wasn't easy, especially after Dad died, but look where we are now. I'm going to serve my country with honor, and it's because you taught me what honor means." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her son was crediting her with teaching him honor, when the reality was that she'd built their entire relationship on a foundation of lies and concealment. The woman he admired for her integrity had spent 25 years hiding the most important part of her identity. The cognitive dissonance was almost unbearable. "Marcus, I want you to know that whatever happens in your career, whatever missions you're assigned, I'm proud of you. But I also want you to be careful. The world is more dangerous than it appears, and the enemies you'll face are more sophisticated than you might expect." Her son pulled back to look at her with concern. "Mom, that sounds like you're speaking from experience. Is there something you're not telling me?" The question hung in the air between them like a loaded weapon. Sarah could feel the weight of 25 years of carefully maintained deception pressing against her desire to finally be honest with the person who mattered most to her. But she also knew that the truth could destroy everything they'd built together, everything she had sacrificed to give him. "I'm just a mother who worries about her son," she said finally. "Promise me you'll remember your training, trust your instincts, and never take unnecessary risks." Marcus smiled, though his eyes suggested he sensed there was more to her concern than maternal anxiety. "I promise, Mom, and I promise to stay in touch as security allows. You won't have to worry about me going radio silent for months at a time." The mention of radio silence sent another chill through Sarah. In her operational days, extended communication blackouts were standard procedure for deep cover missions. The fact that Marcus was already thinking in those terms suggested that his assignments might involve exactly the kind of work she was most qualified to advise him about. As they rejoined the celebration for final goodbyes, Sarah noticed Commander Mitchell approaching. He moved with careful deliberation of someone who had made a decision and was prepared to act regardless of the consequences.
"Mrs. Chen, Marcus," Commander Mitchell said as he approached, his demeanor shifting back to the formal bearing of a commanding officer. "I hope you've enjoyed the celebration. Marcus, you should be proud of what you've accomplished. The road ahead will be challenging, but your performance during training suggests you're well prepared for whatever assignments come your way." Marcus straightened to attention instinctively, even in civilian clothes, surrounded by family. "Thank you, sir. I won't let the teams down." "I'm confident you won't," the commander replied, then turned his attention to Sarah. "Mrs. Chen, I wanted to thank you personally for raising such an exceptional young man. It's clear that he's learned important lessons about service and sacrifice from watching your example." Sarah felt the subtext in his words like an electric current. He was giving her an opening,
a chance to acknowledge their earlier conversation in a way that might begin to bridge the gap between her two identities. But he was also being careful not to force her hand, allowing her to maintain her cover if that's what she chose. "Thank you, Commander. I've tried to teach him the importance of serving something larger than yourself, even when the service isn't glamorous or recognized." The words came out more loaded with meaning than she'd intended, and she saw understanding flash in the commander's eyes. Marcus looked between them, clearly sensing an undercurrent he didn't understand. His training had already begun to develop his awareness of subtext and hidden communications, but he lacked the context to interpret what he was observing. "Sir," Marcus said carefully, "is there something specific I should know about my upcoming assignments? Something that might help me prepare?" Commander Mitchell considered the question with the gravity it deserved. "Marcus, the nature of SEAL operations means that you'll often be working with incomplete information in situations where standard training might not fully prepare you for what you encounter. The most valuable skill you can develop is the ability to adapt, to draw on all available resources, and to trust sources of information that might not come through official channels." Sarah felt her breath catch. The commander was essentially telling Marcus to be open to guidance from unconventional sources. Sources like a mother whose background might prove more relevant than anyone expected. He was laying groundwork for a future revelation without explicitly violating security protocols. "I understand, sir," Marcus replied, though his expression suggested he was still processing the implications. "Are you saying I should expect my missions to involve situations outside normal operational parameters?" "I'm saying that the enemies we face today don't follow traditional rules of engagement. They blend military tactics with criminal methodology, use technology in ways we're still learning to counter, and operate in environments where cultural understanding can be as important as tactical skill." Commander Mitchell paused, glancing at Sarah. "Sometimes the most valuable intelligence comes from sources with real-world experience in exactly those kinds of complex situations." The conversation was becoming dangerously close to revelation territory, and Sarah knew she needed to either step forward or step back. The safe choice was to maintain her cover, take Marcus home to Nebraska, and pretend this conversation had never happened. But looking at her son, seeing the dedication in his eyes, the willingness to serve, the courage that reminded her so much of her younger self, she realized that the safe choice might not be the right choice. "Marcus," she suddenly said, surprising both men, "would you walk with me for a moment? There's something I need to tell you." Her son's eyes widened slightly, but he nodded. Commander Mitchell stepped back respectfully, understanding that whatever was about to happen needed to occur between mother and son first. As they walked toward a quieter area of the base, Sarah felt like she was stepping off a cliff. 25 years of careful construction were about to be demolished in a single conversation, and she had no idea what would remain when the dust settled. "Mom, you're scaring me a little bit. What's going on? And don't tell me it's nothing. I can see it in your face." Sarah stopped walking and turned to face her son, the young man she'd raised to embody the best qualities of service and honor. In that moment, she made the decision that would change both of their lives forever. "Marcus, everything I'm about to tell you is classified at levels that officially don't exist. By telling you this, I'm violating agreements I made with people who could make us both disappear. But you're about to enter a world where this information might save your life, and I've decided that your safety is more important than my security." His expression shifted from concern to intense focus, his SEAL training automatically engaging as he recognized the seriousness of what his mother was saying. "Mom, whatever it is, you can tell me. I've been cleared for classified information, and I understand operational security." "Not like this, you haven't," Sarah said softly. "Marcus, before I was your mother, before I was a farm wife, before I was anything you know me to be, I was someone else entirely. Someone whose existence was so classified that even her death was faked to maintain operational security.
The words hung in the air between them like a grenade with the pin pulled. Marcus stared at his mother, trying to process information that didn't fit with anything he thought he knew about his family history. "I don't understand," he said finally. "Are you saying you worked for the government?" "I'm saying I was the government, Marcus. For 15 years, I carried out missions that officially never happened, in places that don't appear on any map, against enemies whose names you'll never read in any newspaper." Sarah took a deep breath, preparing to shatter the last of his assumptions. "Marcus, my operational code name was Ghost 7.
The name hit Marcus like a physical blow. Even with his limited exposure to classified operations, Ghost 7 was a legend within the special operations community. Stories were whispered in training facilities about an operative so skilled that foreign intelligence services had entire departments dedicated to trying to identify them. The fact that those stories involved his mother was so far beyond his ability to process that he simply stared at her in silence. "That's impossible," he said finally. "Ghost 7? Was you?" He struggled to reconcile the legendary operative with the woman who had packed his school lunches and worried about his scraped knees. "Mom, Ghost 7 was supposed to be dead. I know. I was there when they staged my funeral. Full military honors at Arlington, closed casket filled with sand, and a headstone that still gets visitors from people who think they're honoring a fallen hero." Sarah's voice carried the weight of years of living with her own supposed death. "The official story was that I died in a training accident. The truth was that political changes made female operatives in deep cover operations politically untenable, and I was extracted before I could become a liability." Marcus sank down onto a nearby bench, his legs suddenly unable to support him. Everything he thought he knew about his family history was crumbling around him. "Dad knew? Your father knew I had a military background, but he thought I'd been an intelligence analyst, not a field operative. I couldn't tell him the truth. It would have put him in danger and violated every security protocol I'd ever signed." Sarah sat down beside her son, her own composure finally beginning to crack. "When he died in that factory accident, I sometimes wondered if it really was an accident. In my world, there are very few coincidences." The paranoia in her voice was something Marcus had never heard before, but it fit perfectly with what he'd learned about operational security and threat assessment. The idea that his father's death might have been connected to his mother's hidden past added another layer of horror to an already overwhelming revelation. "The farm," Marcus said slowly, pieces of a puzzle finally beginning to fit together. "That wasn't just where you decided to start over. That was your extraction protocol." Sarah nodded, impressed by herself by how quickly he was adapting to the new paradigm. A complete identity package, financial support, and geographic isolation designed to let Ghost 7 disappear permanently. "I was supposed to live quietly, never make contact with anyone from my old life, and never do anything that might draw attention back to the programs I'd been part of." "But you raised me to be a SEAL," Marcus pointed out. "Doesn't that qualify as drawing attention?" "I raised you to be the best man you could be. The fact that led you to military service?" Sarah paused, considering the implications. "Maybe it wasn't as unconscious as I thought it was. Maybe some part of me was preparing you for a world I knew you might eventually encounter." Marcus was quiet for several minutes, processing everything she'd told him. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a maturity that reminded Sarah powerfully of the young soldiers she'd worked with during her operational years. "So Commander Mitchell figured it out somehow. That's why he wanted to talk to you privately. That's why he's been giving me those strange looks all afternoon." "He spotted my tattoo during the ceremony. The operational markings aren't exactly designed to blend in with farm wife fashion."
Sarah unconsciously rubbed her sleeve over the hidden markings. "He made me an offer, Marcus, a chance to come back, to use my experience to help train the next generation of operatives. And you're going to take it," Marcus said, not really asking a question. "I don't know. For 25 years, I've lived a quiet life, tried to be normal, tried to pretend that the person who carried out those missions was someone else entirely. The idea of going back to that world..." Sarah looked at her son, seeing so much of herself in his expressions and bearing. "But then I look at you, at what you're about to face, and I wonder if staying hidden is really protecting you, or just protecting me." Marcus reached over and took her mother's hand, a gesture that somehow made him seem both younger and older than his years. "Mom, I need you to understand something. Finding out that my mother is Ghost 7 doesn't make me feel betrayed or lied to. It makes me feel proud and terrified for what you went through, but proud." The simple acceptance in his voice broke something loose in Sarah's chest that had been locked away for decades. Tears flowed freely now, not the careful tears of a worried mother, but the raw emotion of someone who had finally been able to acknowledge the most important part of her identity. "There's more," she said when she could speak again. "The missions I was involved in, the intelligence I gathered, some of it is probably still relevant today. The networks I penetrated, the contacts I developed, the patterns I identified, that information could help protect you and your teammates." Marcus squeezed her hand. "Then you know what you have to do." Sarah looked toward the spot where Commander Mitchell was waiting patiently, maintaining his distance, but clearly ready to continue their conversation whenever she was ready. The decision that seemed so complicated an hour ago was beginning to feel inevitable. If I do this, if I come back, everything changes. Our relationship, your security clearance, probably even where we can live and how we can communicate. Are you prepared for that? Marcus smiled, and for the first time since the conversation began, he looked like the enthusiastic young SEAL who had just graduated from the most demanding training program in the world. "Mom, I've been preparing for this my entire life. I just didn't know it."
The walk back to Commander Mitchell felt like crossing a bridge between two different worlds. With each step, Sarah felt herself transitioning from the protective mother who had spent 25 years hiding in plain sight to the operational professional who had once been considered one of the most effective intelligence operatives in American history. The change was subtle but profound, affecting everything from her posture to the way she scanned their surroundings for potential threats. Marcus noticed the transformation immediately. His mother's gait became more purposeful, her awareness more acute, her entire presence somehow more commanding. It was like watching a butterfly reverse its metamorphosis, returning to a more fundamental form that had been hidden beneath layers of carefully constructed normalcy. Commander Mitchell saw them approaching and straightened slightly, recognizing the change in dynamics. The woman walking toward him was no longer the nervous farm wife who had been overwhelmed by the pomp and ceremony of a military graduation. This was someone who belonged in his world, someone whose experience and expertise commanded respect. "Commander," Sarah said as they reached him, her voice carrying an authority that hadn't been there before. "I've made my decision." "And?" he replied, though his expression suggested he could already see the answer in her bearing. "Ghost 7 is ready to come back to work. With conditions." Commander Mitchell nodded, having expected nothing less from someone with her background. "I'm listening." "First, my son's safety and career are non-negotiable. Whatever assignments he receives, whatever missions he's given, I want assurance that my involvement won't compromise his position or put him at additional risk." "Agreed. In fact, having you available as a resource could enhance his safety by providing intelligence and threat assessment capabilities that aren't currently available through normal channels. Second, I maintain operational autonomy. I'll take assignments, provide consultation, and share intelligence, but I won't be micromanaged by people who don't understand the complexities of the work I've done. Also agreed. The nature of your expertise means that standard oversight protocols wouldn't be effective anyway. Sarah paused, considering her final condition. Third, at any point I determine that returning to this world is putting innocent people at risk, including my son, I reserve the right to disappear again. Permanently, this time. Commander Mitchell was quiet for a moment, weighing the implications of her demand. That's more complicated. The investment in bringing you back, the intelligence value you represent, there would be strong resistance to letting you walk away again. Then we don't have a deal, Sarah said simply. I've already given 15 years of my life to this work and 25 years of exile to protect operational security. I won't become a prisoner of my own expertise. Marcus watched the negotiation with fascination, seeing his mother operate in a professional capacity for the first time in his life. The woman who had always deferred to authority figures, who had taught him to respect chain of command and follow orders, was now negotiating as an equal with a decorated Navy commander. It was both impressive and slightly unsettling. There is another option, Commander Mitchell said carefully. Something that might address your concerns while also maximizing the value of your return. I'm listening. Instead of bringing you back as a traditional operative or consultant, we bring you back as an instructor, someone who trains the next generation of intelligence operatives, shares real-world experience that can't be found in any manual or simulation. Sarah considered the proposal, seeing immediately how it could work. Based at a secure facility, working with carefully screened candidates, focusing on the kind of practical knowledge that only comes from actually running operations in hostile territory. Exactly. And with Marcus moving into active duty, you'd be in a position to help prepare other young operatives for the same kinds of challenges he'll be facing. Your knowledge could save dozens of lives over the next decade. The appeal to her protective instincts was masterful, and Sarah recognized the manipulation as she responded to it. The idea of helping other young soldiers avoid the dangers she'd learned to navigate was almost irresistible, especially knowing that Marcus would be facing similar threats. Where? She asked, her practical side already engaging with the logistics. There are several options, but the most logical would be the Naval Special Warfare Development Group facility, close enough to major operations for relevance, secure enough for classified instruction, and with enough operational activity to keep your skills sharp. Marcus cleared his throat softly, reminding both adults that he was still part of the conversation. If I might ask, sir, what would this mean for my assignments? Would I be working with the same units my mother would be training? Not directly, Commander Mitchell replied. That would create obvious conflicts of interest and compromise operational security for both of you. But the skills and knowledge she'd be passing on would benefit every SEAL who goes through advanced training. Sarah looked at her son, seeing the pride and excitement in his eyes despite the overwhelming nature of everything he'd learned. Marcus, are you sure you're okay with this? Your mother going from farm wife to classified instructor is going to be a significant adjustment for both of us. Mom, finding out that you're Ghost 7 is like discovering that Superman has been living in our guest room for the past 25 years. I'm not worried about adjusting. I'm worried about living up to the example you've set. The simple honesty in his response settled the last of Sarah's doubts. She turned back to Commander Mitchell with the decisive bearing that once made her legendary in intelligence circles. When do we start?
Commander Mitchell's smile carried the satisfaction of someone who had just secured a strategic advantage that could reshape entire operational capabilities. We start with a thorough debriefing and security update. The world has changed significantly since your extraction, and you'll need to understand current threat matrices before you can begin training others to deal with them.
Sarah nodded, her operational mind already engaging with the challenges ahead. How long are we talking about for the transition? I have a farm to manage, financial obligations, and practical considerations that can't just be abandoned overnight. We'll handle all of that, Commander Mitchell assured her. Part of your compensation package will include management of your existing obligations, ensuring that your transition doesn't create loose ends that could compromise security. The farm can be maintained by professionals, your financial situation will be stabilized, and we'll create a cover story for your new position that explains any changes in your circumstances. Marcus watched his mother processing this information with the systematic approach of someone accustomed to complex logistics. It occurred to him that he'd been seeing glimpses of this analytical capability his entire life in the way she managed their household budget, planned for emergencies, and made strategic decisions about his education and future. What he'd attributed to careful parenting had actually been the application of high-level operational planning skills to civilian life. "There's one more thing we need to discuss," Sarah said, her voice carrying a gravity that made both men pay closer attention. "The networks I penetrated during my operational years. Some of those organizations have evolved, but their core structures may still be intact. If I'm coming back into the intelligence community, there's a possibility that my return could trigger responses from people who thought Ghost 7 was permanently off the board." Commander Mitchell's expression grew more serious. "Are you talking about active threats?" "I'm talking about organizations that spent considerable resources trying to identify and eliminate Ghost 7 during my active years. Criminal networks with long memories, terrorist cells that pass down grudges through generations, and foreign intelligence services that never completely bought the story of my death." Sarah's voice carried the weight of someone who had lived with these threats for decades. "My return to active status could potentially put not just me at risk, but anyone associated with me." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the full implications of what his mother was saying. "Are you telling me that there are people out there who might target me because of operations you carried out before I was even born?" "I'm telling you that in my world, the children of operatives are considered legitimate targets for leverage and revenge. It's one of the reasons I stayed hidden for so long, not just to protect operational security, but to protect you from becoming a target." The weight of inherited danger was something Marcus had never considered, but his SEAL training helped him process the threat assessment objectively. "What kind of timeline are we looking at? How long before someone might make the connection between Sarah Chen and Ghost 7? Commander Mitchell and Sarah exchanged glances, both recognizing the sophistication of the question. "It depends on how carefully we manage the transition," Commander Mitchell replied. "If we move slowly, create appropriate cover stories, and maintain separation between your old identity and your new position, we might be able to minimize the exposure. But there are no guarantees," Sarah added. "The moment I step back into the intelligence community, I start leaving footprints that sophisticated adversaries might be able to track. It's a calculated risk, and part of that calculation has to include the potential cost to you." Marcus was quiet for several minutes, considering everything he'd learned and the choice that lay before them. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the measured tone of someone who had been trained to make life-and-death decisions under pressure. "Mom, for my entire life, you've made sacrifices to keep me safe and give me opportunities. You worked multiple jobs, moved us away from everything familiar, and built a completely new life centered on my needs and future. Now you're telling me that you're considering taking on additional risks to help protect other people's sons and daughters." Sarah nodded, seeing where his reasoning was leading. "Well, I didn't become a Navy SEAL because I wanted a safe job. I became a SEAL because I wanted to serve my country and protect people who can't protect themselves. If accepting some additional risk means that you can help save the lives of other operatives, then that's a risk worth taking." The pride in Sarah's eyes was unmistakable, but it was tempered by the maternal instinct to protect her child from consequences he might not fully understand. "Marcus, you're talking about accepting threats that you've never faced, from enemies you've never encountered. This isn't like the dangers you'll face in normal SEAL operations." "Maybe not, but It's like the dangers you faced for 15 years, and you survived them. If you could handle that world while protecting a son you'd never even met yet, I think I can handle it now that I know what we're dealing with. Commander Mitchell observed the exchange with growing respect for both mother and son. The dynamic between them was shifting from protective parent and protected child to professional colleagues who happened to share a family bond. It was exactly the kind of evolution that would be necessary for both of them to succeed in their new roles. If you're both committed to moving forward, then we need to start planning the transition immediately. Sarah, you'll be reporting to Coronado in 2 weeks for initial briefings and security updates. Marcus, you'll be heading to your first assignment within the same time frame, but with enhanced communication protocols that will allow for coordination if necessary. Sarah looked around the naval base where this extraordinary day had begun with such simple expectations. She'd driven here as a farm wife from Nebraska, proud of her son's achievement, but careful to maintain the low profile she'd cultivated for 25 years. Now she was preparing to leave as Ghost 7, ready to resume a career that had been interrupted by politics and resumed by necessity. The setting sun painted the California sky in shades of red and gold, casting long shadows across the naval base. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new threats, and new opportunities to serve. But tonight, for the first time in 25 years, Sarah Chen and Ghost 7 were finally the same person. And Marcus Chen, newly minted Navy SEAL, was ready to begin a career that would be built on the foundation of truth, service, and the extraordinary legacy of a mother who had never really stopped being a warrior.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.